I swear it started as a joke. Not even a good one, honestly. Just one of those dumb, repeated bits you run into the ground with someone you're way too comfortable with. Calvin and I had this thing where we'd call each other practice boyfriends. It started freshman year, back when we were both still figuring out life, classes, and how to survive on instant ramen without losing our sanity. Bro, if we're both single at 30, we're just dating each other, Calvin said once, half laughing as he flopped onto my bed like he owned it. I remember rolling my eyes. Yeah, sure. You'd fold in like 2 seconds. Excuse me? He shot back, grinning. You'd be the clingy one. Not a chance. We shook on it like idiots. A fake deal. A running joke. And for the longest time, that's all it was. Calvin was the kind of guy people naturally gravitated toward. Not in an over-the-top way, just easy. Confident without trying too hard. The type who could talk to anyone, make a room feel lighter just by being in it. Meanwhile, I was more observant. Quiet unless I got comfortable. Which, unfortunately for me, I was around him. We ended up as roommates sophomore year by pure luck. Or bad luck, depending on how you look at it now. At first, it was perfect. Late night gaming, cheap beer, complaining about classes. Normal stuff. The kind of routine that builds something solid without you even noticing. And yeah, I noticed he was attractive. I wasn't blind. But Calvin was straight. Always had been. Or at least, that's what I told myself. So I kept everything locked down. No weird looks, no lingering thoughts. Just jokes. Always jokes. Especially that joke. You'd 100% fall for me, he said one night, pointing a fry at me like it was evidence. We were sitting in some greasy diner at like 2 a.m., both half dead from studying. I snorted. You wish. I'm serious. He leaned forward, smirking. Living together? Sharing a bed one drunk night? It's over for you. Why are you assuming we'd share a bed? Because you'd get scared. He shot back instantly. I laughed, shaking my head. You're actually delusional. But he just held my gaze for a second longer than usual. Am I? He said, quieter. Something about that moment stuck. I brushed it off, of course. What else was I supposed to do? That's the thing about lines, you don't notice when you start getting close to them. Not really. Not until you're already standing on top of one. It didn't change all at once. If anything, it was subtle. Annoyingly subtle. Like how he started sitting closer on the couch. Not enough to call it out, but enough that our legs touched more often than they used to. Or the way he'd casually throw an arm around my shoulders and just leave it there. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just Calvin being Calvin. But then there were moments that didn't fit that explanation. Like one night, we were watching some dumb action movie. He was laughing at something, leaned into me, and didn't move back. I could feel his shoulder pressed against mine. Solid. Warm. Neither of us said anything. And for some reason, I didn't move either. Dude, he said suddenly, not looking away from the screen. You ever think about it? My stomach tightened. About what? You know. He shrugged slightly, like it was no big deal. Us. I let out a short laugh, forcing it. You mean your weird fantasy where I fall in love with you? Not a fantasy, he said. A possibility. I turned to look at him, expecting a grin. But he wasn't smiling. He was just watching me. And for the first time, the joke didn't feel like a joke. I should have shut it down right there. That would have been the smart move. Instead, I said, You're insane. But my voice didn't sound as convincing as I wanted it to. Calvin just hummed, like he wasn't surprised. Yeah, he said. Maybe. Then he nudged me with his shoulder, lighter this time. Relax, Brayden. I'm kidding. There it was. The safety net. The out. I grabbed onto it immediately. Good. Because that would be weird as hell. Right, he said. But he didn't sound convinced either. After that, things should have gone back to normal. But they didn't. Because once something shifts, even a little, you start noticing everything. Every glance that lasts a second too long. Every accidental touch that lingers. Every quiet moment that feels loaded. It reminded me of something I once read, about how these situations don't explode out of nowhere, they build slowly, in almost invisible ways, until one moment changes everything. At the time, I didn't realize we were already there. Standing right on that edge. Still pretending it was all a joke. And then came the night that proved it wasn't. The night where our what if stopped being hypothetical. And neither of us could pretend anymore. It happened on a completely normal night. That's what makes it worse. There was no big lead-up, no dramatic setup. Just another evening that should have ended like all the others. We had gone out with a couple of friends, nothing crazy. Just drinks, loud music, the usual. Calvin was in a weird mood the whole time though, quieter than usual, but not in a bad way. Just distracted. I noticed, of course. I always noticed when it came to him. You good? I asked at one point, leaning closer so he could hear me over the music. He glanced at me, and for a second, his expression softened. Yeah, he said. Just tired. But his eyes stayed on mine a little too long. That same feeling crept back in, like something was sitting just under the surface, waiting. We got back to the apartment late. The kind of late where everything feels quieter than it should. The hallway lights too dim, the air too still. I tossed my keys on the counter, kicking off my shoes. I'm crashing, I muttered, already half dead. Yeah, Calvin said behind me. I didn't think anything of it. Just walked into my room, pulled off my shirt, and dropped onto the bed. Normal. Everything was still normal. I don't know how long I was asleep before I felt it. Not a sound. Not movement. Just awareness. Like something was different. My eyes opened slowly, the room still dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. And then I realized. Calvin was in my bed. Right behind me. Close. Too close. For a second I didn't move. Didn't breathe. My brain was still catching up, trying to figure out if this was real or if I was half dreaming. His arm was draped over me. Not loosely. Not casually. Firm. Like he meant to be there. His chest pressed against my back, steady, warm. I could feel his breathing, slow, controlled. He wasn't asleep. There's no way he was asleep. Calvin, I said quietly, my voice rough from sleep. No response. But his arm tightened slightly. Just enough to make my heart slam against my ribs. What are you doing? I asked. Still nothing. But then. His face shifted closer, his breath brushing the back of my neck. And that's when everything snapped into focus. This wasn't an accident. You awake? He murmured. His voice was low. Different. Not joking. Not teasing. Real. I swallowed hard. Yeah. A pause. Then softer. Okay. That was it. Just okay. But he didn't move away. My brain was screaming at me to say something. To push him off. To make a joke, anything to break whatever this was. Instead, I stayed completely still. Because if I moved, this would become real. And if it became real, there was no going back. You remember what we always joke about? He said after a few seconds. My chest tightened. Calvin, just answer me. He cut in, not harsh, but firm. Yeah, I said. He exhaled slowly, his grip on me shifting, not tighter, not looser. Just intentional. What if it wasn't a joke? There it was. No humor. No smirk. Just the question we'd been circling for months. I let out a shaky breath. You've been drinking. Not enough to make this up. That doesn't mean. I've been thinking about it, he said. I went quiet. Because something in his voice told me this wasn't new. Not for him. How long? I asked before I could stop myself. Longer than I should have. My stomach dropped. All those moments, they weren't in my head. You could have said something, I muttered. You would have shut it down. He wasn't wrong. I hated that he wasn't wrong. His hand shifted slightly against my chest, fingers brushing just enough to make my breath hitch. Tell me to stop, he said quietly. Simple. Clear. A line drawn right there. I should have said it. That one word. Stop. Everything would have gone back, maybe awkward, maybe messy, but still safe. Instead, I stayed silent. And that silence said everything. Calvin exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for weeks. Then, slowly, carefully, he moved. Not rushing. Not pushing. Just enough to see if I'd pull away. I didn't. We're actually doing this, he murmured, almost to himself. I let out a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. This is a terrible idea. Yeah, he said. But he didn't sound like he wanted to stop. Neither did I. Because the truth was, we'd already crossed the line. Way before this moment. Back when it was still just a joke. And now? There was no pretending anymore. For a second, either of us moved. It was like we both understood that whatever happened next, there was no undo button. I could still feel Calvin behind me, steady, warm, his arm wrapped around me like it had always belonged there. But now everything felt different. He wasn't pretending anymore. And neither was I. You're really not gonna stop me? He asked quietly. There was something almost careful in his voice. Not hesitant exactly, but aware. Like he knew how thin the line was. I swallowed. You already know the answer to that. A small pause. Then I felt it, his breath against my neck again, closer this time. Yeah, he murmured. I think I do. He didn't rush. That's the part one remembers the most. There was no sudden shift, no overwhelming move that forced things forward. It was slow. Intentional. Like he was giving me time to change my mind at every second. His hand moved slightly against my chest again, fingers brushing just enough to make my pulse spike. I sucked in a quiet breath. You good? He asked. I let out a short, nervous laugh. I don't know. Honest answer, he said. Yeah. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance back at him. Big mistake. Because now we were close. Really close. Close enough that I could see the shift in his expression. The usual confidence was still there, but there was something else underneath it. Something more real. Less controlled. You're overthinking, he said softly. I always do. I know. There was a beat of silence. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I shifted, just enough to face him more. Not fully. Just enough. His eyes dropped to my lips for a split second. And that was it. That was the moment everything stopped being complicated and just became obvious. Still think this is a terrible idea? He asked. Yeah, I said. He huffed out a quiet laugh. Same. Neither of us moved away. When it finally happened, it wasn't dramatic. No big build-up. No perfect timing. Just a decision. One small movement forward. And suddenly, we were there. It felt weird. Not bad. Just unfamiliar. Because this was Calvin. My best friend. The guy I'd spent years joking with, arguing with, living with. And now there was no distance between us. I pulled back slightly, more out of instinct than anything. We both just looked at each other for a second. Processing. Okay, I said under my breath. Okay? He echoed, a hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. That just happened. Yeah, he said. It did. There was this moment where I expected it to feel awkward. Like we'd immediately regret it. Like reality would crash back in and ruin everything. But it didn't. If anything, it felt quieter. Clearer. Calvin ran a hand through his hair, letting out a slow breath. So, we crossed that line. I huffed out a small laugh. Pretty sure we sprinted over it. Fair. Another pause. Then he looked at me again, more serious this time. You okay with this? He asked. Not joking. Not casual. Actually asking. I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud would make everything real in a way that nothing else had yet. Yeah, I said finally. And I meant it. Something in his shoulders relaxed at that. Like he'd been bracing for the opposite. Good, he said quietly. We didn't immediately jump into anything else. No rush. No pressure. We just stayed there, close, figuring out what this actually meant. Because that was the part we hadn't joked about. Not really. What now? I asked after a while. Calvin smirked slightly. Well, according to our very scientific agreement. I groaned. Don't. If we cross a certain line, he continued anyway. We're basically dating. That was not part of the rules. It was implied. You're making that up. Am I? He shot back, raising an eyebrow. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop the small smile creeping in. Shut up. He nudged me lightly. You love me. The words slipped out so easily, so casually. But they landed heavier than either of us expected. We both went quiet. Because yeah? That part? That had never been a joke. I exhaled slowly, staring at him. We always joked about it. Calvin nodded, his expression softer now. Yeah, he said. Then, after a beat, guess it's not a joke anymore. And for the first time that night, that didn't scare me. Not even a little. Because somehow, somewhere along the way, it had already become true. We just finally stopped pretending. The weirdest part? The next morning, I woke up before him. Which almost never happened. For a second I didn't move. My brain was still half asleep, floating somewhere between normal routine and whatever last night was. Then I felt it. His arms still wrapped around me. Like nothing had changed. Except everything had. I stared at the wall, trying to process. Because this, waking up like this, in the quiet, without alcohol or late-night energy to blur things, it made everything real in a way that hit way harder than anything the night before. Calvin shifted slightly behind me, his grip tightening for a second like it was automatic. Like he was used to this. My chest tightened at that thought. Braden. His voice was rough with sleep. I froze. You're awake, he mumbled. Yeah. You okay? It was such a simple question. But it carried way more weight now. I exhaled slowly. Yeah. I think so. You think so? He said, a hint of a smile in his voice. Give me a second, man. I muttered. This is new. He let out a quiet chuckle against my shoulder. Fair. Neither of us moved right away. No rush to untangle. No awkward scramble to create distance. If anything, we stayed like that longer than we needed to. Eventually, I turned slightly, enough to face him properly. His hair was a mess, eyes still half-lidded, but he was looking at me like he was trying to read something I hadn't said yet. What? I asked. Just checking if you're about to freak out and pretend this didn't happen. I huffed. You really think I'd do that? He gave me a look. Okay, yeah, I admitted. That was definitely an option. He smiled at that, but it wasn't teasing. More like relieved. Glad you didn't, he said. I hesitated, then asked the thing that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I woke up. So what is this? Calvin raised an eyebrow. You're hitting me with that already? Yeah, I said. Because last night was one thing. This, I gestured vaguely between us, still way too close. This is different. He didn't answer right away. Which, for Calvin, was unusual. He always had something to say. But now, he actually looked like he was thinking. I don't know exactly what it is yet, he said finally. Honest. No jokes. But I know it's not nothing. That landed heavier than I expected. Because, yeah, same. You ever think about how long this has been building? He added quietly. I let out a breath. I've been trying not to. He huffed a small laugh. Yeah, same. We were really out here acting like it was all just a joke, I said. Calvin shook his head slightly. Nah. We just used the joke so we didn't have to admit it. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I wasn't filtering it. Not pushing anything down. Not pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. You knew? I asked. He met my gaze. I had a feeling. For how long? He smirked faintly. Longer than I should probably admit. I groaned, dragging a hand over my face. That's insane. You're telling me, he said. You're not exactly subtle, Braden. Shut up. But even as I said it, I couldn't stop the small smile creeping in. Because somehow, this didn't feel like everything was falling apart. It felt like things were finally making sense. Okay, I said after a second. But we need rules. Rules? He repeated, amused. Yes, rules, I said, sitting up slightly now. Because this can get messy fast. All right, he said, pushing himself up too, leaning back against the headboard. Hit me. I held up a finger. 1. No pretending this didn't happen. Agreed. 2. No weird avoidance. Also agreed. 3. I hesitated. We actually talk about stuff instead of hiding behind jokes. That one made him pause. But then he nodded. Yeah, he said. We can do that. I studied him for a second. You're being suspiciously reasonable. He smirked. Don't get used to it. So what does that make us? I asked. Calvin tilted his head slightly, watching me. You really need a label right now? No, I admitted. But I need to know we're on the same page. He nodded slowly. Then, without breaking eye contact. We're us, he said. Simple. Maybe too simple. But somehow, it worked. Because forcing it into something too defined too fast, it would have ruined it. This wasn't some random situation. This was us. Built over years. Jokes, tension, everything we never said out loud. And now? We were finally saying it. Even without words. Calvin nudged my leg lightly with his. You overthinking again? Always. He smirked. Good. Keeps things interesting. I rolled my eyes, but I didn't move away. Didn't feel the need to. Because for once, I wasn't wondering what if anymore. I already knew. And somehow, that felt a lot less scary than I expected. If you had told me a week earlier that this would become our normal, I would have laughed in your face. But somehow, it did. It wasn't a big, dramatic shift. No sudden. We're officially this now. Moment. It was smaller than that. Quieter. Like how Calvin started knocking before coming into my room, and then immediately ignoring the knock and walking in anyway. Or how we still sat on the couch like we always did, except now neither of us bothered pretending we needed space. You're in my spot, I muttered one night, walking into the living room. Calvin didn't even look up. Your spot? Yeah. That side is mine. He stretched his arm across the back of the couch, smirking. Pretty sure it's our spot now. I rolled my eyes. You're insufferable. Yet here I am. I dropped down next to him anyway. Close enough that our legs touched immediately. Neither of us moved. That was the thing. The normal stuff didn't go away. If anything, it made everything feel more real. Because we weren't acting different. We were just not holding back anymore. But it wasn't all easy. Of course it wasn't. So are we telling people? I asked a few days later. The question had been sitting in my head, getting louder every time we were around others. Calvin glanced at me from across the kitchen, leaning against the counter. You want to? I don't know, I admitted. Do you? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. That's complicated. Yeah, I said. No kidding. It wasn't just about us. It was everything around us. Friends. Assumptions. The fact that, up until very recently, this whole thing had been a joke we never expected to actually explain. We don't have to figure that out right now, he said finally. I studied him. You sure? He nodded. Yeah. I'd rather not rush it and mess things up. That made sense. But still, there was that small part of me that wondered what this looked like from the outside. What we looked like. Because from the inside, it already felt real. Later that night, we ended up back in my room. Not intentionally. It just happened. Same as before. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone when Calvin walked in without knocking, again. You ever gonna start locking this door? He asked. Why would I do that? I shot back. He smirked. Good point. He flopped down next to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. We sat there in silence for a bit. Comfortable. Easy. Then he nudged my shoulder lightly. You've been in your head all day. I sighed. Is it that obvious? Yes, he said immediately. I dropped my phone onto the bed. I just don't want this to get weird. He turned slightly, propping himself up on one arm. Define weird. You know what I mean, I said. We had a good thing before. I don't want to ruin that. His expression shifted. Not defensive. Just steady. You really think this ruins it? He asked. I hesitated. Because that was the thing. It didn't feel ruined. If anything. No, I admitted quietly. It just feels different. Different doesn't mean worse, he said. I looked at him. There it was again, that calm certainty he slipped into when he actually cared about something. Not joking. Not deflecting. Just real. Come here, he said suddenly. I frowned. What? Just come here. I hesitated for half a second. Then shifted closer. He didn't make a big deal out of it. Didn't say anything else. Just pulled me in slightly, like it was the most obvious solution in the world. And yeah, it worked. Because the second that distance disappeared, so did half the noise in my head. See? He murmured. Not that complicated. I huffed a quiet laugh. You're so annoying. Yeah? But he didn't let go. We stayed like that for a while. Not talking. Not overthinking. Just being there. And it hit me then. All those jokes we made? All those what-if moments. They weren't random. They were us testing something we didn't have the guts to face yet. Until now. We always joked about it, I said quietly. Calvin shifted slightly, his chin brushing near my shoulder. Yeah. I exhaled. Guess we weren't really joking. He smiled, soft, not smug for once. Took you long enough to figure that out. I nudged him lightly. Shut up. But I was smiling too. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like we were risking something. It felt like we had finally stopped lying to ourselves. And honestly, that was a lot easier to live with than I expected. The first real crack didn't come from us. It came from everyone else. You two are getting weird. That's what our friend Marcus said, completely out of nowhere. We were all sitting in the living room, me, Calvin, Marcus, and a couple others, just hanging out like we always did. At least, it should have felt like always. What are you talking about? Calvin asked, way too casually. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I don't know, man. You're just different. Different how? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He gestured vaguely between us. Like that, he said. You keep doing that. Doing what? Calvin shot back. Marcus smirked. Exactly. I felt Calvin shift slightly next to me. Not away. Just aware. Dude, you're overthinking it, I said, forcing a laugh. Am I? Marcus leaned back, studying us like he'd already made up his mind. Because I've known you guys for years. And this? He pointed again. This is new. The room went quieter than it should have. Not dead silent. Just enough that I could feel it. That tension. Calvin exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. We're literally sitting on a couch. Marcus snorted. Yeah. Basically on top of each other. I glanced down. Okay, yeah? He wasn't wrong. At some point, our legs had ended up tangled again. Not obviously. Not in a way that screamed anything. But enough. It's not that deep, I muttered. Marcus just smirked like he didn't believe me for a second. Sure, he said. Whatever you say. He dropped it after that. At least out loud. But the look he gave us? That lingered. And suddenly, everything Calvin and I had not been worrying about was right there. Later that night, after everyone left, the apartment felt different. Too quiet. Too aware. Well, Calvin said, tossing his keys onto the counter. That was subtle. I leaned against the wall, exhaling. We were not subtle. He smirked slightly. Yeah, fair. Does it bother you? He asked. I hesitated. Not exactly, I said. It just makes it real in a different way. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I get that. I ran a hand through my hair. I mean, we knew this was coming eventually, right? Probably. And we still did nothing to prepare for it. Definitely. I let out a short laugh despite myself. Great. Hey, he nudged me lightly. We're figuring it out. That helped. A little. But later that night, it got harder to ignore. I was in my room, lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Thinking. Overthinking. Because now it wasn't just about us. It was about how this looked. What it meant. What happened when people really started asking questions. A soft knock pulled me out of it. Then the door opened anyway. Of course. You gonna keep spiraling or you want company? Calvin asked. I didn't even look at him. You already came in. Yeah, but emotionally you seem unavailable. I huffed a quiet laugh. Shut up. He walked over, dropping onto the bed next to me like always. But this time, there was a slight hesitation. Not from him. From me. And he noticed. Of course he did. That's new, he said quietly. I frowned. What? You pulling back? I sat up slightly annoyed. I'm not pulling back. You hesitated, he said. That doesn't mean anything. He studied me for a second. Not pushing. Just reading. It's the Marcus thing, he said. Not a question. I sighed, rubbing my face. It's everything. There it was. Out loud. Calvin leaned back on his hands, looking up at the ceiling. Okay, he said after a second. So let's talk about it. I glanced at him. Right now? Yeah, Brayden. That was literally one of your rules. I groaned. I hate that you're right. I know. There was a pause. Then I exhaled. I just don't want this to turn into something stressful, I said. Or complicated because of other people. Calvin nodded slowly. That's fair. But, I added quieter now, I also don't want to act like this is something we have to hide. That landed. I could see it in his expression. Yeah, he said. I don't want that either. Silence settled between us again. But not heavy. Just real. So what are we saying? I asked. He looked at me. Really looked. We're saying, he started slowly, that we don't let other people decide what this is. I held his gaze. And we don't freak out just because someone noticed, he added. We knew this wasn't invisible. I let out a breath. Yeah. You still with me? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Yeah, he said. Simple. Clear. And somehow, that mattered more than anything Marcus could have said. Because, yeah, people were starting to notice. Things were shifting. But the important part? We weren't pretending anymore. And this time, we weren't backing off either. I thought the hardest part would be figuring things out between us. I was wrong. It was the in-between moments that got complicated. The ones where nothing was said, but everything was implied. A few days after the whole Marcus situation, things felt steadier. Not perfect, but stable. We were still us. Still joking, still arguing over dumb stuff, still falling into the same routines. Just with that added layer we couldn't ignore anymore. Until Friday night. We were at a small get-together at a friend's place. Nothing crazy, just music, drinks, people packed too close in a space that wasn't meant for it. I was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, half listening to a conversation I didn't care about. That's when I noticed Calvin across the room. Talking to some girl. Which shouldn't have mattered. At all. Except it did. I tried to ignore it. Told myself I was being stupid. We hadn't labeled anything. We hadn't had that conversation. But still. The way she was laughing. The way he leaned in slightly to hear her better. The way it all looked so normal. Like nothing had changed. You good? The voice next to me snapped me out of it. Marcus. Of course. Yeah, I said quickly. Why? He followed my line of sight. Straight to Calvin. And then he smirked. Not subtle at all. Interesting, he muttered. My stomach dropped. Don't what? He said innocently. You know what? He glanced between me and Calvin again, clearly putting pieces together in real time. Oh, he said. That one word? Way too loaded. Marcus, I started. He held up a hand. Relax. I'm not gonna out you or whatever. That's not. But, he cut in, lowering his voice slightly. You might want to figure your situation out. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He tilted his head toward Calvin again. Means you don't look like someone who's just casually watching his roommate flirt. I went still. Because yeah? That hit a little too close. I'm not. I started, but the words didn't land. Marcus just raised an eyebrow. Brayden, he said not unkindly. I'm not stupid. I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. This is exactly why we didn't say anything. Yeah, he said. And I get that. He paused. Then added. But hiding it doesn't make it less real. I didn't have a response to that. Because I knew he was right. Across the room, Calvin laughed at something the girl said. And for some reason, that annoyed me more than it should have. Go talk to him, Marcus said suddenly. What? No. Yes, he said. Because whatever that is, he gestured vaguely between me and Calvin. You're clearly not as chill about it as you think. I'm fine, I insisted. Sure, he said. That's why you've been staring at him for the past 5 minutes. I shut up. Just figure it out, Marcus added softer now. Before it turns into something messy. Then he walked off, leaving me there. Thinking. Overthinking. I stayed in the kitchen a little longer than I should have. Trying to shake it off. Trying to convince myself it didn't matter. But it did. So eventually, I pushed off the counter and walked over. Calvin noticed me immediately. Of course he did. Hey, he said, turning slightly toward me. The girl glanced between us, curious. Hey, I replied, trying to sound normal. You need something? He asked. It wasn't cold. Just neutral. Too neutral. I shrugged. Nah. Just checking where you disappeared to. He smirked slightly. I've been right here. Yeah, I said. I noticed. Something in my tone must have given me away. Because his expression shifted. Just a little. Give me a second, he said to the girl. She nodded, clearly intrigued. Then he turned back to me. Walk with me, he muttered. We stepped out onto the balcony. Cool air. Quieter. Just us. The second the door closed behind us, He looked at me. What's going on? I crossed my arms, leaning against the railing. Nothing. He gave me a look. Try again. I hesitated. Then sighed. I don't know what we're doing, I admitted. There it was. Calvin's expression softened slightly. Okay. I gestured back toward the party. You're in there acting like nothing's changed. That's not. And I'm over here trying to figure out what this even is, I added. He went quiet. I told you, he said after a second. We're figuring it out. Yeah, but when? I shot back. Because right now it just feels like. I stopped myself. Like what? He pressed. I looked away. Like I'm the only one taking it seriously. That landed hard. Because it wasn't entirely fair. But it wasn't entirely wrong either. Calvin exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. That's not what this is, he said. Then what is it? I asked. He stepped closer. Not defensive. Not distant. Just closer. It's me trying not to rush something I actually care about, he said. That stopped me. Because that wasn't what I expected. I'm not in there because I don't care, he added. I'm in there because I don't want to mess this up by forcing it into something before we're ready. I held his gaze. And you think this, I gestured between us, isn't already something? He didn't hesitate this time. It is. Silence. Then, I'm here, aren't I? He said quietly. And yeah. He was. Right in front of me. Not avoiding. Not pretending. Just figuring it out. Same as me. I exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving my chest. Okay. He studied me for a second. You good? I nodded. Yeah. A small smirk tugged at his mouth. You jealous? I scoffed immediately. Shut up. He laughed softly. But he didn't push it. Instead, he leaned against the railing next to me. Close. Familiar. And just like that, the noise in my head quieted again. Because this felt real. Not perfect. Not fully defined. But real enough. And maybe that was enough for now. After that night, something settled. Not in a boring way. Not like we suddenly had everything figured out. But the tension, the kind that makes you second guess every move, started to fade. We didn't rush back inside the party. We stayed out on that balcony longer than we needed to. Just talking. About nothing important. And somehow, everything important. You realize Marcus definitely knows now, I said at one point. Calvin snorted. Marcus knew before we did. Yeah, that tracks. I leaned against the railing, glancing over at him. So what, we just let people figure it out? He shrugged. Unless you want to make a big announcement. Absolutely not. Then yeah, he said. We let it be what it is. Simple. Again with the simple answers. But I was starting to realize something about Calvin. He didn't overcomplicate things that didn't need to be complicated. I did enough of that for both of us. Eventually, we went back inside. And yeah, things were different. But not in the way I expected. Marcus caught my eye almost immediately. Raised an eyebrow. Smirked. I just shook my head slightly. Not denying it. Not confirming it. He nodded once. Like, got it. And that was it. No scene. No drama. Just an understanding. The rest of the night? Normal. Or at least, our version of normal. Calvin stayed near me more. Not obviously. Not in a way that made it a statement. But enough that I noticed. Enough that it felt intentional. At one point, he leaned in slightly and said, You still overthinking? I huffed a quiet laugh. A little. Good, he said. Wouldn't be you otherwise. I nudged him lightly. You're annoying. You've said that like 10 times this week. Because it's true. He grinned. And just like that. Everything felt easy again. Later that night, we walked home together. No rush. No awkward distance. Just side by side, like always. You know, Calvin said, hands in his pockets, we never actually finished that joke. I glanced at him. What joke? He smirked. The one where we said if we ever crossed the line, we just ate. I groaned. You're still stuck on that? I'm just saying. He continued, ignoring me. Technically, we're way past that point now. I shook my head, laughing under my breath. You're unbelievable. And you didn't say no. I glanced at him. He was watching me again. Not pushing. Just there. Yeah, I said after a second. Yeah? I shrugged slightly, trying to play it off. Yeah. That was it. No big speech. No dramatic moment. Just that. Calvin smiled, not the cocky one, not the teasing one. Something softer. More real. Good, he said quietly. We kept walking. But something had shifted again. Not in a scary way. Not in an overwhelming way. Just clearer. Because the truth was, we had spent so long joking about it. Dancing around it. Pretending it was hypothetical. But now, there was nothing hypothetical left. We always joked about it, I said, breaking the silence. Calvin nodded beside me. Yeah. I looked ahead, a small smile pulling at my mouth. Crazy how that worked out. He let out a quiet laugh. Yeah, he said. Best bad joke we ever made. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Because somewhere between all the teasing, the late nights, the almost moments, we stopped pretending. And what we had? It wasn't a joke anymore. It was real. And for once, that was exactly enough.